What if menopause wasn't something to fear, but a rite of passage as powerful and transformative and sacred as puberty or childbirth? Society often tells us that menopause is something to dread, framing it as the slow fading of our vitality, the beginning of decline, or a problem we need to fix. But what if menopause isn't the end of anything, but the beginning of a new chapter, a time of profound wisdom, self-reclamation, and untapped power? What if this transition is not about losing control, but finally stepping into it? Menopause is more than just a biological shift. It's an opportunity to empower ourselves with knowledge, to deeply understand the brilliance of our own biology, and to make informed choices from a place of trust, confidence, and personal power. This is not a season of loss. It's a season of awakening, where we get to rewrite the story of who we are and how we care for ourselves. Welcome to Pleasure in the Pause, a podcast dedicated to empowering midlife women to reconnect with their bodies, pleasure, and power through perimenopause, menopause, and beyond. I am your host, Gabriella Espinosa, women's health and sexual wellness coach, and it is my pleasure to be here with you. Today's guest is here to help us rewrite the story of menopause, not as something to survive, but as an invitation to thrive. I'm absolutely thrilled to be joined by someone whose work has deeply impacted the way we approach women's health, Dr. Aviva Romm. Often referred to as the face of natural medicine in the 21st century, Dr. Romm is a midwife, herbalist, Yale-trained MD, and an unwavering advocate for holistic and integrative health. With over 3 decades of experience, she's been at the forefront of a movement to reclaim menopause as a natural, powerful transition, a rite of passage that deserves not fear, but reverence. In today's conversation, we'll explore how menopause isn't just about hormones, it's about hormone intelligence. It's a time to tune into the language of our bodies, to trust the wisdom woven into our biology, and to approach this transition with clarity, confidence, and care. Menopause isn't something that happens to us. It's a transformative journey we get to meet with open eyes, informed hearts, and the radical belief that our bodies are not broken. They are brilliant. This is more than a life stage. It's an awakening, a chance to shed what no longer serves us and step boldly into the most authentic, unapologetic version of ourselves. It's such an honor to welcome to the show Dr. Aviva Romm. Welcome, Dr. Aviva. It is such an honor to have you here on the show today.
Oh, Gabriella, thank you. It's a delight to hang out with you today.
We met briefly at the Swell event in Brooklyn over the summer, I think. And I remember you were sitting in front of me, standing in front of me, and they put on some music during the break to get us all moving our bodies. And you were just on fire in your body. I'm like, who is this woman? I love her energy. I've got to meet her. And you turned around and I'm like, I know this woman. And then I remembered this face from this book that I read so many years ago,
Oh,
I Road Revolution, and this incredible book, Hormone Intelligence. I'm like, that's Aviva Romm. Oh my goodness.
dancing like a crazy woman.
You were having the greatest time, and
I
I
love
loved meeting
dancing.
you. And I'm so glad that you're here. And when I met you, then I'm like,
Um,
I've got to have you on the show. So thank you for saying yes.
Thank you
Thank
for
you for
having
being here. Dr. Aviva, you have a fascinating journey from starting out as a midwife at a very young
me.
age and
Yeah.
herbalist to becoming a Yale-trained MD. Could you share with our audience what inspired you to pursue women's health and how your experiences as a midwife and herbalist shaped your medical career?
Yeah. So I went to college, as you mentioned, really young. I was 15, and I thought I was going to be a surgeon, actually. I loved science and nature together. I've loved as a kid, and since I was a kid, and anatomy and healing just merged together. I'm like, I want to be a physician. And then very early on, I'm talking like 2 months into college at 15, I meet this young guy, of course, right? Hair down to his butt, gorgeous, this Mayan ancestral New Yorker, and he was a couple years ahead of me, and we were friends. We were just friends, And he showed me a book called Spiritual Midwifery. And I was
Oh,
like, okay, I love this. This is what I want to do. And he also showed me some things about like local plants and herbal medicine. And I was an inner city, like New York City housing project kid. So it was like getting woke to nature and woke to hippiness and woke to alternatives. It's like, oh, I really love this. But this was 1981. So there wasn't really any way to formally study these things. So long story short, I left college at 16, apprenticed myself to a home birth midwife, and started studying herbal medicine with anyone who would teach me. There were like 3 books on the market back then. But as I was evolving this knowledge of women's health, pregnancy, birth, natural medicine, this backstory started to also emerge that was very political, actually. So, whether it was the history of the witch trials in the Middle Ages or in early New England, to the systematic eradication of First Nations and Black and women healers in the early colonization of the United States, all the way until the 1960s. And the intersection of that with the pharmaceutical industry and the food industry led to this awareness and awakening that there could be a different way and that I wanted to learn and offer a different way. And so one thing led to another, and I studied midwifery. I happened to study and train in a collective of African American midwives in Atlanta who worked primarily in the Black community there. And that was also eye-opening in a different way. As I said, I grew up in a housing project, which is still a medically underserved community in New York. But now working in a community of people who were talking to me about things like the Tuskegee experiments, which really happened, in which people, Black people, were withheld treatment for a life-threatening, brain-threatening medical condition under the auspices of science and all the endemic racism that was happening and has continued to happen in medicine, created sort of this combination of a social political mission to make sure women's health was being protected, that women and their babies were being protected, and that combined love of healing and science and the things I was learning about food and nutrition and herbs and mind body healing just created this whole practice that I had for 2 decades as a midwife. But then other political reasons like high maternal mortality rates, overuse of antibiotics, lack of access within the system for people who were trying to practice healthcare for themselves differently when they did need to interface, led me to reconnect with my desire to become a physician, both to offer more services to more women and more children, but also to have a sort of voice that is recognizable in almost like a Trojan
mhm.
horse kind of way, to be able to be influential around policy and thought leadership so that we can change women's perspectives and women's ability to take care of themselves. But if they're still interfacing with a system that is patriarchal and racist and sexist and ageist and genderist and all those things, how do they navigate that? So that is the long and short of it. And out of that has come online courses for practitioners and the general public, my books that I've written. I still see patients, membership on organizations like Every Mother Counts around policy and activism. That's what I do now, and speak with
Beautiful.
wonderful people like you. And I will add that as my work started out in pregnancy and birth, and women's health more around the gynecological needs around that era of women's lives. But pretty early on, I was already teaching courses and classes on menopause in my early 30s, late 20s, early 30s, because women were saying, I know you haven't gone through that yet, but all we're getting from conventional medicine is basically nothing. So that's been part of the journey. And now my work is like all across women's whole life arcs from first period to after their last period.
Yeah, you have a powerful body of work, and thank you so much for sharing your beautiful story. Your voice is
Yeah.
so needed in this
Mm.
space. I love the way that you bring that lens of natural medicine, botanicals, this sense of social justice and activism into women's health? Because as they say, the personal is political. Our bodies have
Yes.
become political.
Yes.
And so we so need voices like you. So thank you so much for everything that you bring into the space.
Thank
You have been
you.
a leader in holistic health. I know that you've been called the face of natural medicine for the 21st century. What does a holistic approach to health mean to you? Could you describe that for our listeners, especially as we move into perimenopause and menopause? You say that you were already talking about perimenopause and menopause from this lens in your 30s. How does it differ
Mhm.
from the conventional medical model for you?
I think with the holistic lens, I mean, it's kind of in the word holistic, which comes from the word whole. And the word whole and the word health have the same origins, the same Greek language origins. And we can't just look at our health in these silos and isolated body parts the way conventional medicine does. And conventional medicine has very limited tools when you come down to it. It's basically drugs and surgery. That is, and I'm saying that with love and respect as someone who is a physician, but it's very limited. And conventional medicine tends to take a very, okay, you come into the doctor's office because you're having fatigue and hair loss and you've gained some weight and your skin is dry and you're constipated. And your doctor's like, all right, we have hypothyroidism. Maybe if you're lucky, they say that to you. Actually, it can take women 5 years and five doctors to get a proper diagnosis. But the diagnosis happens as if like it just came out of nowhere. Or diabetes is an even better example. Somebody comes in and their blood sugar is high enough to get diagnosed. And I was like, okay, you have diabetes. Let's just put you on the medication. It doesn't take into account that there are many factors that go into even just our physical well being, right? We know nutrition, stress, sleep, socioeconomic status, all these things, genetics, environmental exposures, gut health, right? These all contribute to whether we develop medical conditions. And health is even more complex than that because the World Health Organization said many years ago that health is much more than the absence of disease. And that is a really important statement because I think both in conventional medicine, but even in the wellness model, we can get very fixated on, am I taking the right probiotic? Am I eating the right diet? Am I getting enough protein? Am I lifting enough weights? Especially like in the menopause world, there can be a lot of rules. But one of the questions that I think we often forget to ask is, how do I feel? And
Mm.
another question is, how do I really want to feel? And what are the other aspects of our lives that feed into our well being, whether it is trauma, lack of mothering that we may have had, childhood poverty or lack that is its own kind of trauma that affects how we think and how we live, relationship stress, marriage stress, the crunch of caring for children and caring for older parents at the same time, the very real stressors that we face, whether it's walking in a parking garage at night or whether we're hitting our mid-50s and wondering if we're gonna be replaced by a younger model in our jobs because we know that kind of stuff is happening too. What are all these pieces that come together to make us feel well and feel healthy and feel safe and feel like we're thriving? And that's to me what holistic health truly is.
Mm.
It doesn't
Yes.
discount the physical and the medical either. Those are very
Mhm.
important, but it doesn't exclude all the other parts.
Yeah, you raised so many great questions, so many interesting points that I'd love to touch on. In your work with women across all life stages, right?
Mhm.
You've had this incredible insight into the wisdom and resilience of women's bodies. What lessons have you learned in the span of your career about this inner wisdom that we have, this resilience, and what lessons do you feel are often, you've mentioned some of them, what the ones that are overlooked by traditional medicine?
Yeah, I think that if I would say this inner wisdom, it's that we do all have a very deep knowing. Some of us may be more connected to it than others for various reasons. Trauma can cause people to dissociate. Some people might not believe in their own voice, so they don't listen to it. Often, I think most of us are just so busy that we forget to stop, get quiet, and listen.
Mm.
And a couple of times on my Instagram, I've posted just a very simple quote, which says, I wish I hadn't listened to my intuition, said no woman ever. And I think whether it's our intuition in a medical setting where we feel like we're not being treated respectfully, in a relationship that we're staying in too long, whether that's a friendship, a spousal or partnership or work relationship, or sometimes even as simple as maybe I really don't need to watch that next episode of Netflix. Maybe I'm actually just not listening to my body, which is saying, get in bed, do some meditation, read a book.
Mm.
You can watch it another time, or that knowing, it's not even intuitive, but the knowing, like, you're out to dinner with friends, everyone's having a glass of wine, you're 52, you know that you're gonna feel terrible the next not even the next day, but by 3 in the morning, and everything inside you is saying, don't do it, because 'cause you're gonna feel terrible," but then we override that. So I feel like on so many levels, it's just really tuning in to how settings and situations and interactions and opportunities and offers and options make us feel and going with that, following that. Because really, between the two of us, we could probably come up with a list of things that we later were like, "Ugh, I should have listened to myself when I" simple
Mm.
things and bigger things.
Yeah. And you know that you hear a lot, and it's been my personal experience, and I hear a lot from other midlife women that intuition does get more fine-tuned as
Mhm.
we get to the other side of menopause. And as you say, we're probably just so busy and we're overriding those signals, but they're inherently there, right? There was another quote that you had on your Instagram page, speaking of quotes that I
Mhm.
loved, that really made me reflect. It's something like this: so many years of education, yet nobody ever taught us how to love ourselves.
Yeah.
Like this negative self-talk and how it can also activate our brain's fight or flight response,
Yeah.
and cortisol, high cortisol levels leading to stress, burnout, inflammation, chronic health issues. Why is this self-love so important? You hear about it a lot, right? And it becomes,
Yeah.
why is this so important? How can women reframe self-critical thoughts to support their nervous systems and overall well-being and really
Yeah.
allow you to tune into that inner wisdom?
So I think it comes back to that original question that we were just talking about is listening to our bodies. And I think that part of what happens, and I definitely feel this for myself, and I'm 58, and I work with many women in our age range and in that midlife cycle and juncture. And I think we are just less tolerant of bullshit. I think for me, I'm very energetic, but my sleep isn't exactly the same as it was a few years ago, even. My moods aren't exactly the same as they were a few years ago. And I just don't have the tolerance on some level to not listen. And I don't have the extra energy to tolerate things that aren't really a yes for me. Part of the self love, and again, listening to ourselves, is having boundaries. And I
Mm,
know those can be really hard to set, right? We have a lot of things that we have to do. We have a lot of things that we want to do. And sometimes we end up saying yes to more than we can handle that perpetuates our overwhelm, our burnout. And so listening again to that inner voice, really giving ourselves the love to set the boundaries so that we have time for quiet. We have time for reflection. We have time for true, meaningful self care. But also, we have time for the things that are important to us, right? For me, being on a board, an organization, a nonprofit that is dedicated to something that I deeply and profoundly not only believe in, but know we need systemic change in, maternal health and maternal mortality, is something I'm deeply passionate about. And so I want to, at this phase of my life, have time to give that time, which sometimes means I can't be saying yes to everything else, right? So it's that self-love, I think, can show up in the form of boundaries. And I think where I see a lot of women struggling in this phase of life is that we are often not sleeping as well. We do know that menopause, just the change in our estrogen and progesterone, can impact our moods, our focus, our stress tolerance. And so going with that knowledge and that understanding, to create a life that is really healthful for us can help also prevent the, like, vicious cycle of things keeping us up and worrying us at night because we're not getting to them, or feeling
Mm,
anxious because we always have more that we're not getting done. Or for me, I've had times, I don't know if this has ever happened to you, where, like, I'm choosing between something I need to get done and actually exercising. I'm like, "No, I can't do that. This is not acceptable at this phase of my life. I have to prioritize the things that keep me healthy and help me enjoy my life."
absolutely. Yeah. It's really about those priorities and non negotiables and setting those
Yes.
own inner boundaries with yourself, right? Because it's, again, so easy to override them in the name of productivity, in the
Mhm.
name of meeting other people's demands or expectations. I do it a lot, but I know we're at the start of 2025, and that is definitely one of my priorities is just, okay, I'm going to set this inner boundary. It's my health, my well-being is first and foremost
Yeah.
before work, before other people's demands and needs. And it hurts, right? Sometimes it hurts to set those boundaries because other people are not used to seeing you, especially our kids or our family members, right? They're not used to seeing that side of you. And
Yeah, or
so
we've spent our whole life giving and being taught that we're expected to do that so that we can feel guilty when we do set boundaries and limits.
Yeah. So I'm over the guilt.
I
I'm
hear
over
you.
the guilt, and it's just prioritizing myself because I know when we do that, we have more
Yeah.
bandwidth for others. So we can be more present for others, especially we're in this kind of sandwich generation where we're taking care of our teenage kids, our kids leaving the house, our parents, and ourselves. So
I've got people who are, like, 45, they're trying to get pregnant, they're on the edge of perimenopause, or they have, like, toddlers, and they're taking care of older parents, or they have toddlers and teenagers. I'm just watching women in this midlife phase managing so much.
I'd love to talk to you about mothering in menopause. But before we go there, I wanted to talk about something you said. You've said that being a woman is not a diagnosis, and
Mm.
that within us, and I love that, within us is an ancient blueprint meant to orchestrate our hormones, which you call hormonal intelligence, which is the basis of this incredible guidebook, Bible
Yeah.
that you've written. Could you talk to us a little bit more about this concept and how women can tap into their own hormonal intelligence? I think it goes back to this kind of intuition, this self knowing that is so important.
Yes. So the idea that being a woman is not a diagnosis, that concept and that phrase, which I bake into hormone intelligence, is based on I can't even tell you how many women in my medical practice, online, DMing me, texting me, commenting on social, like everywhere, conferences I go to. I went to the doctor for my severe period pain. Oh, you're a woman. That's just par for the course. I went to the doctor because I'm tired all the time and I've gained 30 pounds and my hair is falling out. Oh, well, you're postpartum. That's just normal. You're a woman, right? That happens postpartum. I am having anxiety, I'm not sleeping, my libido's gone, and my cholesterol, my blood sugar have gone up out of nowhere. Oh, well, you're a woman. That happens in menopause. And so
Mm,
all of the ways that our very real and sometimes like significant medical diagnoses get dismissed under this aegis of like, well, you're a woman, that's normal, or just deal with it, or here, take the pill, or take this, without actually saying, okay, one, is that normal for that woman? And keep in mind, normal and healthy do not mean the same thing, right? Normal just means like it's average. Lots of people have it. That's technically what normal. Oh, it's normal for 8-year-olds to start getting their period or going into puberty. When more and more kids are, then we actually shift the definition and we start to define that as normal. Or it's normal because it's normal to have horrible period pain because half of all women have period pain, but that's not biologically normal. It's just normal in our modern world. But another thing that I say is just because you're having hormone problems doesn't mean you're broken. It means that we're living in a world that creates fractures in how we communicate this biological messaging that we're supposed to be creating, and that's what hormone intelligence is. So the idea that from the beginning of time, women have had a very clear biological blueprint, right? We start menstruating around a certain typical age range. We become able to get pregnant around a certain typical age range. We go into menopause around a certain typical age range. Our monthly menstrual cycles happen with the same cyclic flow of hormone changes. That has really not changed, as far as we know, since the beginning of our time on this planet. And so what is it that in the last 30, 40 years, and even more so in the last 10 to 20 years, has led 1 in 8 women to have a thyroid problem? So many women to have autoimmune diseases, 1 in 8 women to have endometriosis, 1 in 8 to 10 women to have polycystic ovary syndrome, so many women to struggle with their fertility, and so many women to really be deeply struggling with their menopause transition and symptoms. Not only that, when we look at the number of women who then develop heart disease or diabetes in their 50s and beyond, dementia, these are newer modern phenomena. And so the idea of hormone intelligence is that is an innate hormone intelligence, that is an innate blueprint. But then we can be intelligent about it by learning about our bodies, by understanding our cycles, by understanding these life cycles and how we can best support them, ideally before we're in them, but at least when we enter and are moving through them. And that becomes the intelligence of understanding how that blueprint works and what nourishment, what foods, what lifestyle, what healthy gut microbiome, all those things can be to help keep that blueprint as aligned as possible as it's intentionally meant to be in nature and biology,
Mm.
and realign it when it has gotten off kilter.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. Yeah, I feel like a lot of that blueprint gets disrupted. Tell us what disrupts that blueprint. I know you in your book you
Yeah.
outline, you talk about these disruptors that
Mhm.
are all around us.
Yeah, so when you're in medical school and you learn about hormones, you learn endocrinology, the very basic definition that we're given of what a hormone is a chemical messenger. And I describe it as the game of telephone. That game, like one person says a phrase and then you pass it along, and by the end, the last person repeats it, and it can sound just absolutely ridiculous, like humorous, crazy, like nothing what the original sentence started out as, right? And that's how I think about our hormones in the modern world that we're living in. They are actually messengers and they get released from various glands in our bodies, whether it's our pituitary, our hypothalamus, our pancreas, our adrenals, our ovaries, etc. And they're sent along pathways in our body where eventually they dock into these ports and convey a message. But along the way, many things can happen. You can be exposed to endocrine disrupting chemicals like PFAS from nonstick pans or our phthalates in our cosmetics and plastic. They're everywhere, right? So instead of the message that your body is sending getting to that docking point, to that receptor on the cell, an endocrine disruptor gets there. Or maybe you have so many endocrine disruptors in your circulation that those are read by those glands as hormones. And those glands are like, we don't actually need to produce more estrogen because she's got so much circulating around. So let's dial that back. Or let's not produce as much thyroid hormone. So just the way that these messages get interrupted is something that's really important to understand. And then what are the things that can interrupt them? So I mentioned endocrine disrupting chemicals, stress, high levels of
Mm.
stress or chronic stress or recurrent stress produces cortisol. Cortisol can actually interfere with the production of thyroid hormone and ovarian hormones. So it can interrupt thyroid function, it can interrupt fertility, gut disruption. We know that when our gut microbiome isn't healthy and optimal, we don't actually manufacture and properly eliminate estrogen well. And so we can have high levels of estrogen that we're not eliminating well, and estrogen dominance. We can have low levels of estrogen because we're excreting too much of it. Nutrition is the building blocks of actually making the hormones themselves. So we need to have enough fat, enough cholesterol in our diet. We have to have enough body fat. So we often see people who are extreme dieters, extreme fasters, or extreme athletes. And honestly, it doesn't have to be that extreme. It can just be enough to tip someone over the edge to not being able to manufacture their sex hormones like estrogen and progesterone and ovulate. We can have low nutrition in general. So there are a number of nutrients that are required to keep our hormone production healthy in these different parts of our bodies, the different glands. And then inflammation.
Mhm.
Inflammation is very common, it's very chronic, and that can disrupt these hormones messengers and signaling so many things. And it's not like we have to be, oh, the sky is falling and freak out. It's more like, how can we have a basic understanding and awareness of the ways that we can stay healthy? So, just one really simple example, right? We know that eating a wide variety of plant foods in our diet doesn't mean you have to be a vegetarian or a vegan, just getting enough plants in your diet. So, you want 8 to 10 servings of fruits or vegetables or plant based foods a day. And then you want 30 different types over the course of the week. And it's not that hard. Is it? A lettuce is a type, an apple is a type, onions are a type, garlic is a type, carrots are a type. If it's just a salad, you'll get a lot of them. So if you get all these different types and enough produce in your diet every day, you're actually going to have a healthier gut microbiome. That's all you have to do. Like that and getting some lacto fermented foods and avoiding things that damage it, like ultra processed foods and too many antibiotics and too much ibuprofen and things like that can damage it.
Mm.
But we know that not only are we supporting healthier gut, but that is going to help prevent inflammation. It's going to help keep our estrogen levels healthy. So it's not like we have to do a million different things. There are some really basic core lifestyle things that we can do. Getting enough sleep and adding in 10 minutes of meditation or journaling, either or once a day, trying to get 7 hours of sleep a night. That in and of itself can reduce our stress and reduce our fatigue. That means we're gonna have less sugar cravings, means we're gonna eat less sugar and ultra processed foods, means we're gonna have a healthier gut microbiome. We're gonna produce less cortisol, which not only helps keep our hormones healthy, but we know that lack of sleep can actually increase your weight, just the not getting enough sleep by 5 to 10 pounds on average a year. The lack of sleep means we're not detoxifying our brains, which is an increased risk for cognitive problems. So these little things, right? A few little things can go a very long way.
Yeah, wow. The way that you describe it makes so much sense. I'm like, oh, okay, it's not this big kind of project, science project that we have to
It's not.
endure.
And that all said, I want to be very transparent. I have done all of those things since I was 15 years old. And I'm
Mhm.
very fortunate. At 58, my labs look gorgeous. I don't have high cholesterol, blood sugar problems, my inflammatory labs, all of it, my thyroid, it looks gorgeous. I just had them done a few months ago. That said, I too have not been and I've had a very easy hormonal life. I did not struggle with PMS or period pain. I didn't have fertility problems, healthy, easy pregnancies. And all of that said, I have not been exempt from menopause affecting my sleep or having more anxiety or gaining a few pounds. Like that's happened to me too. And so within all of this, how do we also find acceptance for what we experience at these life changes and new tools, right? Every time we enter into a new juncture in our life, we need to think and feel, were the things that I was doing before, are those still serving me now? Do I need to change something? Do I need to add something? Do I need extra support in some way? And I think that's also so important. There's no one diet that's gonna see us all the way through our lives. There's no one way of exercising or anything that we don't necessarily have to continually reevaluate. Maybe drinking enough water, the basics of a healthy diet, the basics of exercising and movement, there's the thread, but then we still need to adjust as we go along. Or at least I have, and most of the women I take care of have to.
That makes so much sense. I'm thinking as you're talking, that's what I've had to do, right? I've had to
Yeah.
constantly like pause, reassess. Is this working? Is it not working? What I try not to do is beat myself up, right? There's so you can get to the narratives that we have around
Same.
us being like, you're not doing the right thing, you're doing it wrong, or you got to do more. But it is this understanding that our bodies are these beautiful, constantly evolving vessels. And it takes that awareness of pausing and reassessing and adding some of these protocols. You outlined some wonderful protocols that involve nutrition, lifestyle, stress management, herbal remedies, which I love.
Mm,
And all of those can make such a huge difference in just buoying this kind of hormonal intelligence that we have.
yes. And we
And
have to
that's
remember, like, my body is not your body,
yeah.
is not anyone else's body. So what might work for me to lose 5 pounds, I'm just making that up, or what might work for any of the menopause like Mary Claire Haver or Vondra or any number of people out there in the world who are or Halle Berry or Brooke Shields or whomever it is that you follow, we're all here to offer options, but it's also important to realize that just because something that I do doesn't work for you doesn't mean you're broken either, right? And we can often judge ourselves against others. There's also a lot of noise out there. There's so
Mm,
much noise. I can't tell you how much time I spend in my medical practice at each patient appointment going through the latest thing on the internet and whether that actually works or whether it's got any evidence behind it or whether it's a thing or just a fad. And I find that there's so much noise sometimes. I'm like, should I be eating that much protein or should I be doing that much weightlifting or should I like what should I do? And if I'm struggling with that, I can't imagine how overwhelming it is for other people.
mm. Yeah, I know with all this current awareness around menopause, it's wonderful, but with it comes all of these narratives and information that can feel divisive. That they're either
Mhm.
strictly medical or sometimes strictly the natural alternative route. And these two sides can feel like they're battling with each other, creating even
And it's
more
not 2
confusion.
sides. It's yeah, that's a
Yes.
false dichotomy. It really is when I think about integrative medicine and the options that we have, I think about it as do you remember when you were in I hope people still do this. We're old enough that we did, but you know what a number line is, right? Like,
Mhm.
you start at 0, and then there's the negative numbers, and then there's the positive numbers, but it's like a line, right? And I think about a line of what are the things that are available to us along the spectrum of very low risk, very accessible, like changing your diet or trying to improve your sleep with circadian rhythm reset or adding a little magnesium to your diet, maybe like moving up the spectrum a little because it's a supplement, all the way to the very legitimate and also great options of things like hormone replacement therapy and GLP-1s and all those things that we're being exposed to all the time, but aren't benign, right? They are still medications. And then I also look at a second line in comparison, like in conjunction with that is where are you along that line? First of all, what's your value system and what's your personal preferences? But also how bad are your symptoms, right? Like I don't believe in suffering for the sake of suffering. So if somebody comes to me and they're like, I'm having hot flashes. They're really not that bad. They're not bothering me. It's maybe a couple of times a day. I can like layer my clothes. Maybe it's once at night. So I'm sleeping naked and I keep my bedroom cool. But I want to optimize and I don't necessarily want to have a few hot flashes a day because it might happen when I'm at a board meeting and I'm giving a presentation. I'll say, okay, what can we do? We can reduce stress, spicy foods, things like that. But if someone comes to me and they're having hot flashes all day, all night, they can't sleep, they're miserable, they're stressed, they're embarrassed, we can try the natural things. And if those, because that's what they want to do and they help, amazing. But also, we do have these other tools. We have SSRIs, we have hormones. Where along the lines do you fit and what do you want to try? And what is safe for you individually? And what's your value system around it? And I think when we think about those things, then we can more easily pick from the tools that are available to us. I don't see it as either or. Unfortunately, I do think it has been set up a little bit as either or in kind of the menopause online world with a very heavy emphasis amongst a small group of influencers that almost has made a lot of I saw this at the Swell conference. Who know me, of course, were coming up left and right. There were probably 20 or 30 people that came up to me that day. And I hear this in my medical practice and I see this in my online communities who are like Dr. Viva, do you think that if I don't take hormones, I'm going to end up with dementia or I'm going to have osteoporosis or this is inevitable? And so there's been fear that has come out of this a little bit that if we don't do those things, or like almost we have to do those things to preserve our youth and vitality, but also our like health and cognitive function, our heart function, our brain function, our bones. And that isn't fully true either for most women.
Mm,
But some
yeah,
women do need those things for all those reasons or want
yeah,
and benefit from those things.
yeah. It really is about trying to create a more inclusive and empowering narrative that
Yeah,
honors
what do
both
you feel about it? Where are you with
medicine, modern medicine, and traditional practices, right? Because
Yes.
I love all the traditional wisdom that has informed natural medicine. I've found that it's helped me tremendously. It just is like this beautiful balm or salve that has
Mm,
helped me. But I've reached points where it's just like a tipping point where I've had to turn to more conventional medicine and instead of dismissing it, right, dismissing it and saying
absolutely.
it's not for me, like really leaning into it and saying, "Okay, what does it have to offer, and how can I balance both? How can I honor both? Because they're both here for a reason. They're both here to be of help to us." And I think your message, you offer us this beautiful middle path, right? Of
Mm,
empowerment, of knowledge, of really getting to know our bodies, of really tuning in our own self knowledge and making us trust, allowing us to trust our bodies and our
yeah.
own decision making process. So I
I
love that
really
you.
want women to give themselves permission. And imagine if you're in midlife and you are looking for perimenopause and menopause health and also perhaps solutions. Imagine if you went to a conference or to a party and you got a beautiful goodie bag at the end, right? And you get home and you go through the goodie bag and you're like, "Oh, I love this. I'm keeping this for myself." And then you're like, "Yeah, no, I'm never gonna use this. I don't know anybody who's ever gonna use this." You toss it. And then maybe something's like, "Oh, I like this, but I think my friend is gonna like it better. She really needs this. I'm gonna give this to my friend." And then you are like, "Oh, this thing, I don't know if I need this yet, but I'm gonna put it in my cabinet and save it for later and revisit it." And it's like, these are the choices. We get the goodie bag. We have the goodie bag. We get to pick from the goodie
Mm,
bag. And also, if you save the things for later that you're not sure, you can always go back and try them, and that's really nice too. It's not like if you start hormone therapy and you find it's not for you, you can go off it. If you aren't sure, you wanna try other things first, you try other things first, and then you're like, I'm just not getting where I wanna get, and I need more help," and then you go to those therapies. I think that's the beauty of now, like this moment, is we have the choices and we have incredible people out there who are presenting us with these choices. And we have to tune in to which choices we feel we need and want, which choices we might need medically, and making decisions based on that calm inner voice, not on fear and anxiety or just what
mm.
every influencer is telling us.
Absolutely. I love that. Yeah. And we're smart. We're
We are
smart.
smart.
We
We're
can make
smart, and there's AI, and there's Google, and there's, like, people, and there are books, and resources, and practitioners, and lots of places we can verify the information if we need to.
Yeah. Thank you so much. That's such an empowering message. I wanted to go back to something you talked about earlier. You mentioned mothering and menopause, right? Many women navigate perimenopause or menopause while still mothering preteens, teenagers, young adults,
Yep,
or like you said, they're trying to get pregnant and they're in that perimenopause state, really desperate to
yep.
have that one child. And it's all the things are happening and we're trying to mother. What advice do you have for women on how to balance mothering others and mothering themselves?
Yes, this is such an important question, and I don't think it's unique to perimenopause or menopause in the sense that I have 4 kids, and I had my kids when I was quite young. I had my 4th baby when I was 30, but I still had to learn to mother myself, right? We can give and give and give, and it's the trope of a woman is to be that ever-giving mother, that ever-abundant fountain. But truth be told is if we don't fill our own cup, we can fill other people's cups, but we burn out. And I don't think we're our best for anyone else when we're spent, when our cup is empty. So being really honest with ourselves about when we need to hit pause, when we need quiet. I just can't imagine, I can't imagine, but because I have grandkids, but being a 50-year-old mom of a 4-year-old and you haven't slept well last night, and now you've got a kid who's every 5 minutes, mom, 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 mom. I'd be like, but, you experience that when you're in your 30s and early 40s with kids too. So, being really honest with ourselves, I think part of the beauty of being in those early middle years and having young children is often by the time we get to that point in our lives, we do know ourselves better. We've often had careers, and so it's not that we are more selfish, but we have more of a developed self that we, I think, can identify and resonate with and protect. And often we're a little bit more resourced at that point in our lives, so we can afford a little more help. And I think giving ourselves permission to get that help and not feel like we have to do it all is really important. I think a la carte mothering is a term my oldest daughter said to me. She said, a la carte mothering is a really wonderful thing that millennials know how to do well, which is, yes, I want to breastfeed my baby and I want to breastfeed my baby till my baby's 18 months old. But I can also go out for a night with my girlfriends and my partner can feed the baby, or I can give the baby formula once in a while if I need to, or I can hire a nanny or a night nurse. I can work and be a great mom. So finding the things that are important to you. I think it also gets complicated when we are mothering in midlife and we have older parents to take care of, because
Mm.
sometimes the urgency and situations of older parents can be challenging. So again, making sure that you're getting the help, tag teaming with other siblings, whatever you need to do to hold your center. I do think that when we believe there's going to be balance, we're setting ourselves up for failure and disappointment and more stress,
Mhm.
because we're always chasing something that isn't real and is elusive. So I think what's more important is, as you said earlier, the term non-negotiables, and I talk about that in my articles in my book where I talk about setting boundaries. What are the non-negotiables that you need to actually be well? Like for me, keeping my blood sugar steady, having some quiet time, like just quiet time to myself, alone time, whether it's to read or knit or be in nature, time where nobody's asking you for anything. What are those non-negotiables? And then what are the things that uniquely bring you joy that you may sacrifice because it's not a non-negotiable, but actually it is? So whether that's girlfriend time or getting your pedicure or going to a movie, whatever those things are for you, make sure you're also doing some of those. Because if
Mm.
we can stay nurtured, not balanced, but nurtured, we're more likely to have the energy and the resilience. And then also knowing that sometimes it just all goes to shit. Like every one of us, I can guarantee you, every one of us who's out here as like a health person that you look up to or influence or whatever you want to say, we also have our days where it all goes to shit. We have our meltdowns, we have our things. So don't hold yourself up to external standards that you might see online, because you can't
Mm.
see what's going on behind the scenes for anyone.
You've mentioned that, of course, menopause isn't something to fix, but rather to embrace. Can you just expand on this idea and share how women can reframe menopause as an opportunity for growth and empowerment? You gave a few ideas there. I think what happens as we move through motherhood and into menopause, or if we're doing both, we can suppress part of ourselves, orphan part of ourselves, I often say, and then we arrive
It's
to
beautiful.
menopause and then it's who am I? And so I think
Yeah.
menopause, I love the way you frame menopause as this time to embrace and reclaim those parts of ourselves and become who we always were, right? Or
Yeah.
we meant to be. So can you share with us some of your ideas around this?
Yeah, absolutely. So I feel like the idea of embracing menopause can sound very lofty and very aspirational and very romantic. The
Mhm.
fact is, we don't actually have a choice but to, at least at the bottom line, accept it. Because if you live long enough and you are in a female body, you will go through menopause. It is 100% inevitable. It should be like, what is it? Death, taxes, and menopause. If you have the grace to live that long, you will go through it and out the other side of it. And you will be an older woman. You will be a midlife woman. And that is something that we all want a long life, but we don't actually want to age or get older. And it's a conundrum. And so at the bottom line of acceptance, if we don't do that, we're basically fighting it and kicking, screaming, and it's just going to be miserable. It's going to be awful if you have symptoms or not even symptoms, but you look in the mirror. And even if you look in the mirror and you've had Botox and face work, you're still going to look in the mirror and you're not going to see the person you were naturally at 24 or 30 or even 45, right? And that can send us into deep tailspin and sadness and grief and mourning. And I think we have to give ourselves permission to have those feelings. And then I think so there's acceptance as the base level of, because denial is only going to work for so long. It's still going to happen. Resisting it, you can do all the things, but it's still going to happen. And so on the other end of it, how else can we face it and thrive in it without trying to embrace it? So when I say embrace it, it's I'm not going to look like I looked at 52 even. I look back at pictures of when I was 50, I was like, "Oh my god, I looked so young," and I'll think, "Oh, I was so pretty, and I was so slim," and all these things, and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, how are you talking to yourself?" And I've got girlfriends who, like, will have these conversations because 'cause they've done the same thing. That's not helpful or healthful, and so how can we be where we are now, and what are the things that really we value, right? Is it just how we look? Is it how we're showing up in the world? Is it our role modeling? Is it embracing how we look as gorgeous as how we are now, right? Instead of holding ourselves up to the standards that our culture holds us up to, which is teenage to 20, when you look at like actual billboards. The fact that it's such a big deal that Pamela Anderson isn't wearing makeup to me is it's shocking. Why are we all so pressured to wear so much makeup that we're shocked that she's not? And then why have we reduced Pamela Anderson to basically only talking about that she's not wearing makeup?
Exactly.
That says something in itself. So to me, embracing it is this is an inevitable phase of life. How can we make it fucking wonderful? And I will say, I am still figuring that out as I go along too. It's not necessarily something that happens overnight. It's a process of moving through it and the changes that we go through. And I think like when you're a teenager, you can't wait to be an adult, right? And all the things that come with, man, maybe having your period isn't that exciting, but you get boobs and you get independence and you get to date, like all the things as like 12-year-olds, we look at the girls who are 16, right? And so puberty is like a rite of passage. We're excited to go through it and become adults. Then, if you're someone who's going to have babies, becoming a mother is a rite of passage that we look forward to. There's motherhood, and it's like just this beautiful thing in our culture. Menopause hasn't been given that rightful rite of passage into this beautiful next phase of what do we get? Who are we? Instead, we're met with like anti-aging, old, outdated ideas about being dried up and asexual and invisible and over the hill. So there's a lot to unpack, I think, for a lot of us as we're going through that. And that's normal too.
And I know that you are currently working on an exciting new book
I
about menopause, where
am.
you're going to infuse all of this wisdom. You're going to
Yeah.
provide this incredible guide for how to do everything that you've just talked about. Can you give us a little bit of a sneak peek of what we can expect and what's inspiring you right now in terms of
Yeah.
this life stage?
I think the thing that's inspiring me most about this life stage is the deep and profound, critical, core, central piece of health for perimenopausal and menopausal women is other women.
Mm.
Right now, for me, it is the other women in my life, particularly who are at my life stage, to be able to share the wisdom that we're gaining, the changes that we're going through, to compare notes a little bit. Are you experiencing that? It's so beautiful and so powerful. Also, I feel like for me, this community at this phase of life is so important as we look into the next generation, next decades of our lives. I read a book by the late Barbara Ehrenreich about getting older. And at this point, she was in her 80s writing about age. And she was talking about how so many of her women, the women in her close circle, and they went and did this outdoor adventure together twice a year. Many of them were old enough that they had outlived their spouses, right? These relationships they had in their 50s, 60s, they became that lifeline as they got into these older years, their crone years. For me, what I'm really excited about is actually creating groups of women that would be an extension of my medical practice, but people wouldn't be patients, but there would be these menopause groups. So I'm planning to launch those really soon. These clinical
Mm.
groups where we can get together and everyone can get their labs and it's all telehealth. We'd go through labs. What are healthy blood glucose levels? What's healthy thyroid for this age? What's healthy inflammation levels? We have sessions with a nutritionist. We walk through movement and how to find the best movement and what are the things that we need to be doing at this life stage. So these groups and these conversations that I'm having with women are deeply informing what I'm writing about in the book. The book is called Force of Nature, and it really is a field guide to this sort of wild, wonderful world of menopause. But often we do need a compass, we do need navigation, we do need some field guides, people, and the actual information to help us navigate this new landscape, this new terrain. So the book is gonna really be everything you need to know. It will have the information, but to choose the information that resonates with you, that meets your needs. So again, back to the hot flashes. "Oh, I'm having a few, they're not too troublesome, I'd rather go natural." Okay, here are all the things that you can do: lifestyle, diet, herbs, supplements. Okay, but you're really struggling. Here's what we need to look at medically and why that can be significant. Because we know women who have hellacious hot flashes, significant numbers of hot flashes, do have higher risk of cardiovascular disease and cognitive decline later. So, what do you need to know about that? What needs to be tested, explored, and where do you need to potentially or want to enter into using more conventional medical options? So, it's going to be that. I feel like the parts that we've talked about today around mothering, not just other people in our lives, but mothering ourselves, finding our wisdom, really understanding and embracing how our brains are changing in perimenopause, through menopause, and later in our life, and how to actually capitalize on what's happening and optimize what's happening.
Mm.
These are all parts of what's going to be in the book.
I love that. And this is a show about staying connected to our pleasure,
Mhm.
and our power and our purpose. How can women stay connected to their pleasure and their vitality, their sexual vitality through the transitions of perimenopause and menopause and postmenopause?
Mhm.
Do you have
Okay,
any
so let's
advice
talk
for?
about pleasure, and then we'll talk about sexual vitality as part of pleasure, because there's pleasure and there's sexual pleasure, and they can be connected, and they can also be two discrete things. So,
Mm.
in my medical practice, and I think I talk about this in hormone intelligence too, I call it vitamin P, vitamin pleasure. And
Ah,
the
okay.
most
Yeah.
most important thing we need to do to stay connected to our pleasure, first, is to give ourselves permission as women to have pleasure and
Mm.
have pleasure be as important a part of our health and well-being as our nutrition, our sleep, and our exercise. Like, pleasure is really important for our cortisol levels, our adrenaline levels, how we sleep, how we eat, what we eat, right? You can't separate it. So, if we're not experiencing pleasure in our lives, I think we need to figure out why, what can we do, and what is your pleasure? I started taking a salsa dancing class with a girlfriend, and I cannot tell you, once a week on a Monday night for an hour and a half, I cannot tell you how much pleasure that brings me. It's a fun, new, sexy way of moving my body. I'm in a group with other men and women. I'm doing it with a girlfriend. We have this kick-ass teacher, this like Brazilian badass salsa dancer. Like, she does bachata and salsa and hip, she's like amazing. And so that to me has brought me tremendous pleasure. Spending time with girlfriends, knitting, like knitting it,
Mm.
watching a TV series. Like, what are the things that bring you pleasure and how can you weave those in? Remembering that food is pleasure. And if we get too restrictive around food, and we lose the pleasure of that actually doesn't help us because there's great research showing that when we restrict, we binge and we eat the quote unquote, I don't like the term women cheat when they're restricting too much on their diets. So allowing food to be part of our pleasure. And then when it comes to sexual pleasure, I think this is very different for every woman. For me, first of all, sexual desire, having libido is part of a vital sign for me that I know that if my libido were to go away or decline significantly, for me, that would be a marker that something in my life or my health has changed. Because to me, it's always been like a really healthy part of my life.
Mm.
Some people, their sexual selves might not be as big a part. Now, I would want to explore, is that because of negative views on sex or their bodies, or is it just not something that is actually is important to them? So it's about finding where a woman is with that. But if sexual pleasure is important to you and has been important to you, or you want it to be important to you, then finding ways to get in touch with what that means for you. How do you express that? If your sexual pleasure has been interfered with by hormones or sleep or body changes, how can you work to heal that? Of course, Emily Nagoski's book, Come As You Are, and her other book, Come Together, are great resources. I
Mhm.
interviewed Emily twice on my podcast. And that also for women means sometimes finding what their pleasure is for the first time sexually, right? It may be exploring that on your own with your own 2 hands or tools that you can explore that with. There's gazillion half of all women, I think over 50 actually own at least one vibrator. I saw that statistic a couple of years ago. So it went up during COVID, but it's important to explore what and how you find your pleasure and what that means to you. And sometimes finding it for yourself if you've never had it before is the best way to then be able to communicate that to someone else if you're in a partnership.
Mm. Beautiful. And as you mentioned previously, that this time, this menopausal time, as we move into these years, is an opportunity to reclaim those parts of ourselves and to really define it for ourselves. It can look different, right? It can be different, but it can be so much better because we know ourselves better. We know what's important for us. We've set our boundaries. I think when we equip ourselves with all the knowledge and know how that you've been sharing so generously in your books, on your social media, I know you have an incredible blog page on your website. I think when we equip ourselves with all that knowledge, we get to know ourselves better. And then, yeah,
Mhm.
get to define what pleasure and sexuality really truly means for us. So that's such
Absolutely.
a whole way to
It's
frame it.
also an opportunity, asked me earlier what kind of an opportunity is when it comes to embracing menopause. The reality is that 80% of people with dementia are women. Women's risk of heart attack increases equivalent to or exceeds men's after menopause. We're at higher risk of osteoporosis, falls, and fractures. It's an incredible opportunity to say, even if I haven't paid attention to my exercise, my sleep, my health, my mental well being, my pleasure until now, the things that we do now set us up for the next decades ahead. And hopefully, as I said, anyone who lives long enough, has the grace of living long enough, is going to go through menopause. Hopefully, all of us actually have, if the average age of menopause globally is 51 or 52 years old, hopefully we have another 30 or 40 years beyond that at least. And so how can we not just think about our lifespan, but how can we think about our health span? What do those years look like? And what can we do our best to create now so that at 60, 70, 80, we're living independently? Maybe we're still having sex. We're still going to salsa class or teaching salsa class. I've seen people in the hospital whenever there's 18 different medications. It's like, how do we not do that by taking
Yeah.
care of our health now? And that's the opportunity.
Yeah. Beautiful opportunity. Thank you so much, Dr. Aviva, for sharing your wisdom, your story, and your heart with us today. Your work is really, truly a guiding light for so many women navigating this transformative life stage. Tell us, how can we find you?
First of all, thank you, Gabriella, for this beautiful conversation and these thoughtful and deep and meaningful questions. I very much appreciate it and the opportunity to talk about what I'm doing. You can find me very easily. The blog and podcast you mentioned, you can find through my website, which is just Aviva, at avivaromm.com. It's AVIVA. It's my first name, ROMM. It's my last name. That is really me hanging out over on Instagram. So Dr. Aviva on Instagram. And connect with me through that. And then through my website, you'll find access and information to my courses, my medical practice, my other books that you've so graciously mentioned. So I would say those are the two best ways to find me. And then my podcast, anywhere you listen to podcasts, it's on Health with Aviva Romm.
Wonderful. Thank you. And I'd love to share if you have the links ready or to these menopause groups that you're planning on setting up.
Stay tuned in my social media.
Mm-hmm.
Stay tuned on my website and opt into my newsletter on the bottom of my website page or in any of the sidebars where the articles are. And then I'll also be announcing it in my newsletter. We should be starting in March or April. I'm very excited.
Wonderful. And your
And
new
actually, we may run a beta. So
Mhm.
this is, I'm not, you could put this in the show. We're probably going to run a very accessible, if not free, beta. And we'll probably announce that just through my newsletter and social media. So that'll be an opportunity for folks to get in really early and share their biggest questions and their biggest concerns as I shape this. And that will also contribute to the information that's in the book. Because it's really important for me to hear what women want and need. So that's what I can share back about.
Thank you so much for listening to us, for believing in us. Your work is truly so needed in our lives right now. Thank you again, Dr. Aviva, for being here with us today.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Pleasure in the Pause. Want to help me spread more pleasure in the world? Hit the share episode button and send it to a friend or post it on your Instagram stories and tag me, Gabriella Espinosa. And if you really love this podcast, please leave a rating or review, as this helps the show get in front of new listeners. Finally, if you would like to access even more pleasure and stay in touch, sign up for my free pleasure upgrade bundle of powerful mind-body practices by going to pleasureinthepause.com. Remember, your pleasure matters.